Hey everyone, welcome back to another video in the first working day on Don's big tire Supra. So the intro montage was spent kind of cutting up this shear intercooler. And that may seem a bit crazy, but there's a good reason for it. So what we are going to do to start this video off is to build a tube from the intercooler to the throttle body or vice versa. One way or another, we are connecting the intercooler to the throttle body and then building another mount for it that will actually tie the intercooler into the chassis. So I've gone ahead and leveled the intercooler and got it in its position and everything else. So now I can begin building the tube structure. So firstly, I guess, why are we changing the intercooler on this car? It had one before, the car went fast with it, so why go through the trouble of putting a new one in the car? Well, the reason is quite simple, and it comes down to one word: efficiency. So the intercooler that was in the car before, Don was having some issues with pressure drop and pressure ratios, and he wasn't quite happy with the data that he was seeing. So the old intercooler, he had stacked the cores rather than running the cores side by side. So the idea behind this intercooler is to not stack the cores and to see what happens in terms of pressure drop, pressure ratios, so on and so forth. See if it makes the car happier, and this is a really nice looking intercooler as well. Ron over at Shear Fab, he does a really nice job with his intercoolers, and although I felt kind of bad cutting this up, it is for the greater good. So one bit that I really have to pay attention to with this whole setup is this bar right here. This bar kind of serves as a go, no-go gauge for where everything is located. That bar is the same as what is located underneath of the one-piece front end, and everything that I'm building kind of needs to sit behind it. If I look straight down, you can see that I have a bit of clearance. I've located the intercooler a little bit back from where Don's marks were, just to provide that clearance there, as I don't have the time to redo things if it doesn't match up and it doesn't fit how we'd like it to. But with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get this tube knocked out, or at least get a start on it before I reach another point that I want to talk about. And once that is squared away, we can move on to the actual steel mount for this and get the intercooler fastened into the car. The first of the modifications to Don's intercooler are completed. So what I've done here is replace the outlet van gen with this 5-inch tube coming off of it. It terminates at the V-band that corresponds to the V-band on the intake manifold. And this tube actually serves two purposes. It's obviously a tube. It will obviously be a conduit for pressurized air to make its way into the engine, but it also serves as the mount for that side of the intercooler. So we did a similar system, a similar setup on the previous intercooler for Don's car. And that's actually what this bolt right here is from. So rather than building some other tube architecture that comes off of the tube nose, that comes up and ties into the other two threaded bosses on this intercooler, well, we can just use that tube to hold that side of the intercooler up. And it worked very well on the previous setup. So that is actually the next thing that we are going to do. Now that this tube is squared away, I can go ahead and with these two threaded bosses, design and build a little mount. So what we are going to do with this is build a sleeve style mount. And what I mean by that is rather than welding some sort of bracket onto the tube chassis right here, what I'm going to do is take a piece of tubing that I have, a piece of steel, I think it's chromoly tubing, and cut it so it will sit on top of this tube, and via a couple of T-bolt clamps essentially, that will hold this side of the intercooler in place, and the intercooler will then be mounted and in its home. So in order to do this, I first have to do some drafting and make at least the base plate that will fasten to the side of the intercooler here and allow me the opportunity to start building the actual bracket assembly off of it. So hopefully that explanation makes sense. If not, then it should as I begin to build this. But with that being said, let's go ahead, get to it, and start getting this intercooler fully mounted in Don's car. day number 1 working on Don's car is in the books, and I could not be any happier with the progress that was made. So at this point, we now have a mounted intercooler. Like I talked about earlier, the intercooler tube that is now part of the intercooler serves as the mount for this side, and then this little sleeve bracket deal here serves as the mount for this side. And this intercooler is pretty well rock solid in there. So now that this is done, and I guess I'll show you guys one little detail that makes me pretty happy. So I have my little bubble angle level deal here. And let's see if I can zoom in. With it sitting on the timing belt, which should be level with the engine, you can see it's at 0 degrees. And if I move it down to this intercooler tank right here, if I can get it to sit correctly, and I'm just holding it in place, but we're essentially right at 0 degrees there as well. So that means the intercooler is sitting level with the engine, and I'm assuming it's sitting level with the chassis as well, as I cannot imagine that the engine is cockeyed in the car. But with the intercooler mounted at this point in time, I have one more modification that I have to do to it, at least right now, and that is this water port right here. So obviously, this isn't going to work in its current location, so what we'll do is remove it and then place it on the bottom side of this tank somewhere right in this area. And I'll cut a little kind of weird trapezoidal, or almost trapezoidal, patch panel that I'll put over top of this, weld it in place, and everything will be good to go. I'm not getting into that today. It's been a long day here, so I'm going to get out of here. But tomorrow we'll come in, knock out that portion of the intercooler modifications, and maybe play around with some turbo locations. We're going to start today by moving this water port to the bottom of this tank. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to scavenge this actual bung and just reuse it. But I guess we won't know until I get it cut off and see just how, see if I can get it off in a clean manner or if I need to get another bung. So let's go ahead, pull the intercooler off, get to cutting, get to fitting, and see what we can accomplish with this water tank. I got the water port relocation done on Don's intercooler. Thankfully, I was able to reuse the bung that was already there. But with ORB bungs, there is one crucial step that I advocate everybody takes into consideration when you are working with especially these larger ORB bungs. So right here, I have, it's a male number 16 fitting. The threads are the same as it would be on an ORB bung. And we can see as I begin threading, right there, it almost immediately begins to get tight. So as you weld these larger ORB bungs, they have a tendency to distort, and distort to such a degree that you aren't able to easily get a fitting in place. Now, yeah, you could force the fitting in there, but threads should thread without any issue. They should be nice and smooth and happy and all of that. So what I like to do is to take my tap, and you can get big taps like this pretty easily on eBay. A number 16 bung is a 1 5/16 12 thread. And I'll take this tap, I'll chase the threads, and by the time that I'm done chasing them, and I'll show you guys once I get this, or once I'm completed with the rethreading process, that number 16 fitting or number 16 bung will thread directly into there without any binding or anything like that. Now I positioned the intercooler with the tap facing down. It ends up being more difficult to do this rethreading this way, but any chip that's going to come out of the threads is going to fall down rather than getting trapped in the water tank and giving me some more cleanup work to contend with. So if you can see, there are chips that are falling out, meaning that I am actually almost recutting the threads. But this is just some cheap and easy insurance to avoid getting a fitting stuck in a piece like this that you really don't want to have happen. So I'll go through and pretty much reestablish the threads. And I'm probably far enough along now where if I can keep a hand on this intercooler, I'll pull the tap back out, put some lubrication on it. Usually just use WD-40, it seems to work pretty well. And then run the tap the rest of the way through. And like I said, I'll show you guys in a moment how much of a difference this does make as far as actually threading a fitting into that bung. Now with the threads chased, if I take my 16 bung, you can hear and see how nicely it threads in, how nicely it threads out. And like I said, this, in my mind, is a very crucial portion, a very crucial part of working with ORB bungs. With the intercooler modifications on Don's car done, aside from a blow-off valve flange and a couple of reference bungs that I'll add later on, I need to shift my focus now to more effectively mounting the breather tank. Now the tank is certainly in here right now, but Don asked me to come up with a better solution than what is on here right now. So I'll do just that. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do this just yet, but I'll sit and kind of war game a little bit and try to come up with a decent course of action, decent plan of attack for it, and try to execute that to the best of my abilities. So what I'm going to do with this breather tank is add 2 additional points of contact to it. I'm going to use this tab right here and this tab right here to give me my 3 points of contact and to make this breather tank as rock solid as it can possibly be. You guys hear me talk about 3 points of contact. If you've been around for any duration of time, I talk about that pretty frequently, as it is a really crucial point whenever you're mounting something. Something like this tank, it isn't the biggest deal in the world if it kind of sits and vibrates around a little bit, but if we can alleviate that, I want to do so. But something like the dry sump tank, or like in my car, that fuel surge tank, you really don't want those things rocking around and moving around and having the possibility of breaking mounts and having them go free in the engine bay. So we'll treat this tank just the same. I'll use those 2 tabs, mount it via 3 points. Everything will be rock solid, and everything will be good to go moving forward with it. So with the intercooler mounted, with the breather tank more securely mounted, I think that is a good spot to end off this episode. I really want to keep each of the projects or the sub-projects for this greater overall project in their own episodes, in their own little portions of the series. And I'm about done with all the stuff in the front of the car at this point, and the next thing will be figuring out where exactly the turbo is going to live, and we will cover that, and we will accomplish that in the next episode. But with that being said, I think this is about as good of a point as any to finish up this episode. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different journeys and all these different adventures with me. I hope that the Big Tire Supra build series has been interesting so far, and there sure is a lot of really cool work left to come. So like I said, the next thing will be figuring out turbo location. Once that is figured out, then we can begin on the header. And that is my bread and butter. That's what I've been looking forward to since we started talking about this project. And it'll be really cool to finally get that knocked out. But that'll be next week. And this one is all but done at this point. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my 15th anniversary t-shirts and hoodies. Those are available through the end of this year, 2024, and they will be discontinued at the beginning of 2025. So if you would like to get your own piece of BPA history, that's an excellent way to do it. And if not, well, then hopefully there's something that I offer in the future that does speak to you and that you would like to add to your collection. But with all that being said, and before I ramble on any more, that'll be the end of this one, and I will see you guys in the next episode.